that stump. And if you go into a forest, especially a forest that was logged out 15, 20 years ago, you'll see stumps all over the place. I'm talking big logging. Well, you see mushrooms growing, you'll see trees growing right out of the other tree. A forest grows on a fallen forest. Now, we're not really doing a forest here, but we're still mimicking features of the forest, right? So the wood core is part of that. If you go into any forest where you see fallen dead trees and stuff, as that breaks down, that open space, that's where light comes in, and that extra moisture and nutrient and carbon that's there is where your next generation will come up. And sometimes it's brand new seedlings coming up. A lot of times what you'll have is you'll have smaller trees that are just sitting in there in that sub canopy going, please give me some light. Right? And when that big old tree falls or someone cuts it down, that sapling just takes off. But it's still harvesting all of that nutrient that dying tree is releasing and leaving behind.
That's also what a forest fire does, man.
Yeah, correct. And that's why you get such quick regrowth.
What about fungus and the relationship of what's going on below the...
What we're going to do, we are going to inoculate the wood. We're not going to get real serious about it, though. I've got some fungal inoculant. We're going to throw a couple tablespoons in a watering can and wet it down with it. Fungus, if you give fungus food, they'll appear. But no problem giving a little kick in the butt and kicking it over. Now, one thing we do have to be aware of here, most of your conventional gardeners say this is a terrible idea. It's going to eat all the nitrogen. It's going to take a lot of nitrogen. It really is. And if you plant into this system and you don't give it extra fertility, you'll watch a plant go to yellow leaves real quick and show you a nitrogen deficiency.
So what do you use?
I use blood and bone. Which I've got about 6 bags of it laying in there, or chicken manure, any kind of good organic fertilizer with a high nitrogen. Blood is 12-0-0, so 12 parts nitrogen. So compost will help, and we've got a big pile there that we'll be using, but when you've got this much wood, now we've got wood on the top and the bottom, and that top wood's only taking that first layer, only the wood that's in contact with the soil, but it's still taking some off the surface, and you got a ton of carbon down there sucking stuff up. So if you just use compost in that situation, unless you use an awful lot, like a soil mix that's 50% compost, you're still going to have to supplement your nitrogen. This is the good news. If you over-fertilize with nitrogen in a conventional garden, you either burn up your plants, or what usually happens is you end up with excess nitrogen and it leaches away with the rainfall in the fall. Right? You lose it. That's why a lot of times you'll plant a trap crop, something that's really going to capture nitrogen in the fall.
And then compost that.
And then compost that back down so it's there for the spring so you don't lose it. In this system, all of that nitrogen is going into a time bank.
Is that a 1 year? Do you have to put that nitrogen on just 1 year?
1 year, and I mean, I always use a little bit, but you'll see when we do the plants, we'll dig off for the bigger plants like tomatoes and peppers over there. Once we have that mulch on there, we'll pull back and it'll look like a little moon crater. And we'll dig that out, and I'll take a good handful of blood and a good handful of bone in each hole, right at where the roots are, so that plant can establish itself, because it ain't that bad, but it is almost instant. The second that bed's created and gets wet, that carbon down there just starts going, give me some nitrogen.
Now, would it be a good idea to put like a chicken manure when you put the wood in?
What I did for the first couple beds, I put a whole bag of blood on top of the wood, and I put a layer of compost and I built on that, and it didn't make a hill of beans of difference.
What about?
So I'm done with doing that.
What about doing some nitrogen fertigation down the road? Put the meal in and come back in 3 or 4 weeks and stop it.
And you'll want to do that.
Nitrogen.
What you'll do is you watch your plants, and your plants, a plant that needs nitrogen is very obvious. Instead of lush, dark green, it's kind of pale green to a yellowish tint. If you see that, give it more. And in your first year, just give it what, I don't care if you have to get something, I use the Miracle-Gro liquid organic fertilizer. That's made from fermented beet juice, and that's high nitrogen too. And I don't care if I have to, like peppers especially, in the first year in a bed like this, if it doesn't look happy, I'll give it 2 days later, it doesn't look happy enough, I'll give it some more. And I'll just keep giving it, and when it turns green, that bright green color, then just let it be and keep an eye on it. And by the time you get into your second year, it's pretty much give it a little bit when you plant it, maybe give it a little bit mid-season, and that's it. But your first year, you do have this nitrogen trap. Right? It's not a sink, it's not gone. But like I was saying, that's the good news. It's like putting money in a real bank, right? And they don't let it out, it's there. And all that's gonna happen over time is it's just gonna slowly release itself back out into the soil in a very natural fashion. It'll never over-release. It'll never over-fertilize the system. And it'll end up with this big core that's not only spongy, but very nutrient dense. Nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, everything's in there. So your plants know that's down there. So they get very, very aggressive sending those roots into that core by that second year. And with oak, it's only a little bit rotted by your second year. These beds will really come into their own in the third year because we're using oak. We could use a softer wood, but then we get a shorter life cycle of the entire system.
Is that why you said on the podcast using a mix of?
Using a mix is great. I'm using oak because I have dying live oaks all over the place, and I feel like use what you have before you start bringing stuff in. That said, we did have one very, where is he? He brought us wood. There you are. He brought us a truckload of wood and added to that pile over there.
Sweet.
So,
So how much?
How deep should you put this wood in?
what's that?
How deep?
We're doing about a foot here. If there wasn't rock down there, I'd probably do a 2 to 2.5 foot trench, and I'd put a lot more wood in there. I can't do it.
So are you going to put more soil on top of it to build it up higher?
It'll look just like that.
And what's that, about 6 inches?
No, that's probably about a foot of cover over the wood, because the wood's only coming up not that high out of the trench. Some places it's all the way in the trench. Wherever we can fit it in the trench and leave it at the surface line, we'll do it. But if certain pieces of wood are a little bit bigger, certain parts of the trench are a little bit smaller. But if this was clay, he'd already be done with the first bed, and we would probably be putting almost all of that into one trench. We can't do that with the landscape. It's just you see what's coming out of
So
the
will there
ground.
be enough dirt from the excavation, or do you have to add dirt?
Well, we'll probably have to bring in some dirt, but we have about 20 yards of it sitting back there behind my truck. And that all came out of the beds that were here, and it's a sandy, improved soil mix.
What was it?
Down the road.
Since you scraped it off and it's got grass and whatever, is that going to be an issue?
It is an issue some, and it does contribute. So when he starts bringing the dirt over, and we start constructing the bed, what I'm going to ask y'all to do
Break it out.
is look for any grass rhizomes. I don't care about stuff. I don't even care about this. This is prickly lettuce. It's terrible once established, but when it's trying to come up in there, you can just pull it out. It's the freaking Bermuda grass.
Oh, I can't
All right?
stand it.
So we're going to try to pick as much of that out as we can.
The roots.
Now the thing though is we're going to have a big thick layer of mulch on there, and this is another thing you got to do in your first year. Just stay on it. You just keep, if you can't pull it out, break it off at the ground and do it again and do it again and do it again. By the time you get in your second year with that layer of mulch, all those things will rot in the ground. They can't get enough fuel, so they're not being able to photosynthesize. The roots will rot eventually, and you'll kill off most of your weed problem. We could do the newspaper thing, right? I don't like the newspaper. I know it's stupid, I just don't like it. I know because if you studied under the godfather of newspaper mulch, right? I don't like to bring anything. My problem is, what's in the ink? What's in the ink they're printing that stuff with,
Probably
you
coming
know?
from China and it's got
Isn't
lead.
it a good thing to say? I mean, just want to talk about it a second.
Yeah.
Most inks are soy-based. Most inks are soy-based, but even if they're not, if they have heavy metals like mercury or aluminum, on the pH scale, those don't become water soluble for the plants to take up until 4.5. Woo! 4.5 on the.
Dead anyway.
Yeah. I mean, we're in another
So
climate.
they're not available.
It ain't available. So even if it's in your soil, it won't be available to your plants. And if it gets available to your plants, you need to move.
What about pH swinging the other way to the alkaline end? Is that?
See, that's very interesting. I'm glad you brought that up. You're doing a fungal inoculation. Could I ask you, what fungal inoculation are we doing? Is it mycorrhizal?
Yes.
Now, mycorrhizal fungus is amazing fungus. That connects with mycelium, and the fungus under the dirt has like these acid tips, and true nutrient, true mineral is rock. So fungus actually dissolves rock, brings that over to the mycorrhizal fungus, and then the roots talk to the mycorrhizal fungus, and they just have big parties. Now,
You have to find that fungus. You keep talking.
I tell you, I love that.
now, however, your food, your typical vegetation is gonna like slightly more acidic conditions. So that also means more bacterial conditions. Because your major decomposers that are in the soil are bacteria and fungus. Fungus is going to slide your pH scale more alkaline. Bacteria is going to go the other way. Now, there's exceptions to everything. You know, like for instance, your tomatoes are going to love acidic soil, right? Well, I got alkaline soil as well, so when I'm first putting down my seedlings, they kind of have a problem, but with proper mulch, proper life in the soil, they're going to be just fine. I'm not going to say it's not going to work, I'm just saying, what do they prefer? What do they prefer? So, this fungal in soil is going to be very interesting. Brassica family. Who knows what the brassica family is?
Yeah, cauliflower, broccoli, cabbage.
All that stuff, that prefers a slightly more alkaline soil. All these wood chips, these hugel beds, that's bringing in fungus. That's bringing in the alkaline soil. If we're talking bacteria, you know, we want to do something else. Let's bring in some other things. There's a whole list.
You know those things.
Well, I want to leave it up to you. I'm about group participation. Who knows some things you could bring in or that are already on site that will help light the fire for bacteria growth? Yes. Well, I'd say that one
Worms.
worm.
That was
A worm farm is fantastic. Who's built a worm farm? Worms are like your best friend. You know, they're your best friend. You can even put a PVC pipe, which I know it has bad things in it, but there ain't nothing you're gonna do that's perfect. Drill some holes in it, put it in your garden beds, dump your kitchen scraps in there, put some composting worms in, and so now all your castings and the worm juice directly infiltrates your beds. This is, you know, no work. You get worm castings, and then you're inoculating bacteria directly into your soil.
Soldier flies.
Soldier fly larvae. I love soldier fly larvae. I wouldn't do it on this property unless I had tons of chickens. Because it smells so bad. Soldier fly larvae is a terrible smell and it makes you want to vomit. However, there's hardly, and all the protein and all the nutrients go into the larvae. It's not, if you had 100 pounds of waste material and these black soldier fly larvae are eating it, you get 5 pounds of quality waste product that they give. You do that to worms, you get almost all of it back. Now, however, if you got a school, you got 20 people a day, and you need to get rid of things, black soldier fly larvae are going to be a better bet. But at home, it's going to smell too bad. Who knows how else to either inoculate fungal? Let's talk about mycorrhizal fungal. How do you put mycorrhizal fungal into your bed? Because that is a true willing worker to help you. Look at that.
Just drill a hole in the wood, put it in there.
I just thought I found it.
Myco Grow. Where'd you get this, Jack?
Internet. I don't know. The company itself, I direct order it.
So if you have a pond around, and I'm sure there's ponds around here, you make friends with your buddies, you go in and get you 5, 6, 5-gallon buckets of their dirt. Better if you were by an ocean, because the sea, kelp, seaweed and all that, fish, any aquatic life is going to help, but the sea life, saltwater life is going to be your best. Saltwater water, brackish water is actually really good for growing stuff.
But if you got a pond, just get some buckets of the dirt that's under the water.
If you're lucky to live by a mangrove swamp, dig some of the muck out from underneath mangrove. And that is some of the most fertile stuff on planet Earth. I mean, that is...
Okay, I'm in a pine plantation, and what I've been doing is taking underneath the pine needles, the mat of pine needles, you go down and there's the white fungus all growing under the 5 pine needles. And so I scoop out some of that dirt with that fungus. And I work that into my beds. Is that the right kind of fungus, or is that a wrong thing, or?
You're not doing anything wrong. There's hardly anything you can do that's wrong, unless it's keeping doing what we're doing right now in our current systems. So talk about
Is that the same kind of fungus as this? Or
That's a great question. I would say it's a mycelium without knowing anything about it because it's under pine. I wouldn't know without taking a
It's got
look.
little white rhizomes that all go all.
Probably mycelium. That's the all fungus has a mycelium connection. That is the largest living organism on the planet. You guys heard about that? Yeah. Up in Oregon, there's like a 3 kilometer big mushroom.
Yeah.
I'm sure somebody's having fun with that up there.
Well, there's just some research released that the mycelium in the soil are actually not just used as nutrient transfer, but information transfer between plants. There are certain things that a plant can do if it knows through its intrinsic intelligence a certain aphid is about to attack it or a certain beetle is about to attack it. And generally there'll be a plant in a stand that's kind of the weakest plant. It's kind of a magnet. And that's where the pests are going to hit first. The plants that are weak, the pests will take out. If you look, I have very little pest damage, but the pest damage I do have are the plants that were damaged in the hailstorm. The ones that were most damaged immediately became, well, if you have good quality soil with that mycelium in there, it will actually, the plant that's being attacked sends out a signal that can be no less than a distress call that tells the other plants we're under attack.
Here it comes.
Gear
Here's
up.
the girl with the shovel is here.
And
Look out.
that sounds like a little bitty thing. That's actually earth-shattering science. That a plant can literally tell the plant a half kilometer away through a network, because that's a comms network now. It's not just a nutrient network. Hey, Japanese beetles are here.
So what do they
Euphoria.
do?
They change their pH.
We're
They'll
gonna be in
bring in
Avatar.
certain hormones or pheromones. They'll go into certain cycles that make them less appealing to a pest.
That's crazy.
They have built-in defense networks. If you look, this is a very harsh environment. You can look at the soil and see this is fragile. But you look at that forest back there. This old man back here has been trying to cut that forest open for 35 years.
It keeps growing
He doesn't
back.
want it. He doesn't want it bare. He just wants it open like a park. So about every 5 years, he goes in there and he opens it up, and he goes, Jack, it just keeps throwing back. And I'm like, Dennis, that's what forests do.
That's the whole point.
So that system there, even though it's sitting on the, I mean, you can look at the dirt here, and you can see this does not look like a place if you were going to farm, you'd be like, yeah, that's black gold. But that system right there maintains itself just fine. And you can see its success. You can see the cacti on the edge. In fact, let's walk over. This is a very good lesson in edge right here at Parsons Edge. What do you think? And you can see right here, he's trying to fight it. And it's just, there's secession right there. That's exactly what it looks like when it does it naturally.
What's succession?
Succession is if we just cut a field and leave it alone, you come back in 50 years, there'll be a forest. Okay. But it won't grow like this. It'll advance. There'll be a beachhead. And then you'll get an edge effect. And that edge will advance. And you'll get your layers. So if you look right here, he mows that.
Okay.
That's under control. Here, you start successing the wildflowers. You've got a few clumps of trees that he left behind. And you got cactus, because the cactus can handle the dryness and the condition of the soil. And you go right from cactus straight into yucca, and then you go from yucca, and you go back in there where he's opening up. You got a little glade where it's actually forest. You can see you start going into shrubs, hedges, and boom, trees. And then it's thick as all get out. And he'll come in here, and he's told me he goes in here, cuts all the underbrush out.
That's trees.
And that way you can walk through there and go, look, I can walk through it.
Do you reckon he's got more topsoil because his trees are taller?
He's got more topsoil here because this is a wash. This is,
okay.
and I've got.
Oh, your topsoil is over there.
Yeah, and I've got a lot more down there too. That bottom part of that pasture is pretty deep. I buried the dog about 2 feet, dug it with a shovel in about 15 minutes. So it's a totally different scenario as you move downhill. But that's what this is. This has all been eroded. But now that spot behind you, my neighbor told me there's never been anything growing there for 30 years. You can see there is some stuff growing there. We've run it over quite a bit. But all I did there was throw some of that sandy soil down and throw some daikon down. The daikon got about that big and died. But it opened up pathways, and the weeds that were all around it came in. Now we can start working on fixing it. And we did that in 60 days. He came over and he goes, what the hell?
Do you think somebody just moved it sometime back?
I think if you look at this and how shallow the soil is, every time it rains. And that's why I have soil down there. The soil's down there because it came from here. And it really, right about the back of his truck was where it was really bad from there down. Now what you take a look at here, this has been in place for about 6 months.
That's your native soil, huh?
That's native soil, and it's some of that mix.
Now, does the mulch also act as a nitrogen sponge and store nitrogen?
It will. The one thing about the mulch is, like I'm disturbing it there, but this right here is doing nothing to take nitrogen from the soil. It can't. It's not in contact with it. Only that layer on the bottom is. And as it breaks down, it just kind of like ratchets down, and it's actually really fast at taking it and giving it back. It's the core that takes a lot of it, holds it for a while, and it'll take a year before it'll give it back. If it was a softer wood, it might start giving it back in 6 months. If we had a place like when we were in Arkansas, I had dead trees everywhere. Well, why cut live trees or use good firewood for this if you have dead trees? So we were putting trees that were into a good year of rot into the ground, and they worked first year. We didn't do this system. We did raised beds because we were on a much steeper slope, and we did straight old square raised beds, and we cut terraces about 1 degree back into the pit, so the water come down, hit the terrace, fill up, backfill in, and when it finally overflowed, it would sheet over down to the next set of beds. And we put in about 4 feet of wood, and then about a 12-inch soil top of it. And we used, because we had free compost from a compost facility there, we used about 60% compost and 40% soil. And that thing exploded. That's the stuff where I have the pictures on Facebook where I've got the countertop this big, and it's like jalapenos stacked like that from one picking, and it's 24 plants.
Wow.
We had pepper plants this high. We had to try to prop them up with stuff because it would rain, and when the peppers took the water in and got heavy, the limbs would just fall out. You go pick a limb up, and it's just covered in peppers. We had squash. I had one pumpkin. It probably grew about from here to that telephone pole. And I just let it go across the lawn, and I just turned it around and started heading it back, and it got about halfway back before the frost came and killed it. Wow. And that was all out of beds like that, but that was very, very nitrogen intense because it was almost half compost. Right, so the wood could take off. Get off of my beans! He knows how to do it, too. And you can see, okay, right there, next to Max's foot. That's just the bean seed I dropped down in the pathway, and it's even coming up.
Can I ask you a question about mulch on top of the soil?
Yeah.
Once you got it like this, you don't ever come in and turn it. You just go in and you go in and plant.
Who saw the broccoli we grew in? This is the bed we grew the broccoli in.
Yeah.
You ever saw that?
Yeah.
Every root of every broccoli plant is right in that bed. All I did, we got a big harvest of all the main heads. We started cutting shoots. We blanched broccoli, we froze broccoli, we ate broccoli, and just beat the hell out of them. But I planted the peppers long before the broccoli was gone. The broccoli was this tall. I had little pepper plants in between the broccoli, being protected from the wind. Because the wind here in the spring comes off that plant and just beats the hell out of everything. And your little pepper plant's just like, oh shit, why are you doing this to me? So by surrounding it with the broccoli, that sheltered it. And when we get a few scalding hot days here and there in the spring even, and that little plant is still kind of adapting, it's got some shade to work with. And as soon as you pulled the broccoli off, they went and just started going for it, and now they'll the ones that make it will actually probably do really good from that pruning. They'll get really, really bushy and really, really strong, but it'll set them back. And if you look, these beans here that are being nibbled on, these were in the ground when they got hit by the hail. That's new sowed, and you don't really have much pest action on it. Whatever's weak, that's where your pests are gonna go at. Now I'm trying something a guy said on the forum. If you look, some of the beans have nails next to them.
Yeah.
It's not the cutworms, and I haven't lost a bean to a cutworm since I did that.
Were you losing them before?
Yeah.
So you don't have to completely 100% surround it.
No, what happens is just like there. Because I didn't notice. I thought the cutworm just crawled up there and just munched. Apparently, if you've ever seen them, they're wrapped up. They wrap around it and then they munch. But when they wrap around and get a bite of that, well, I don't want that.
Maybe they might not even like being wrapped around.
They might not.
That's what I'm wondering, because I'm wondering if they can still wrap around it and start biting.
It may pull a mild electrical charge with some ion out of the ground, something you or I wouldn't feel, but if you're a tiny little invertebrate with your teeth attached
Electric chair.
well, think about putting your teeth on aluminum
Or
foil.
a 9-volt battery.
Well, no, just aluminum foil with no power on it. It's not fun. We used to, we had a guy that used to make a steer jerky, and you'd wrap it in foil to freeze it so it would last longer. And sometimes a piece of bullet sticks in, you would see it when you bite into that, you don't like it at all, you know. And that might be the same experience. I don't know, but it does seem to work.
Especially if you got fillings in your teeth.
Oh yeah.
And now I've got 2 big cups of.
Now that behind you guys,
No,
that's blackberry and sunchokes. And there's some Potamoran squash in there. They're a small squash that tastes a lot like squash mixed with chestnuts. There's a couple of them in there.
Are you going to do anything to like blackberries?
No, they're a primocane berry. They stand erect on their own, and they fruit on first and second year canes. So what you do is your first year you get a little crop.
That might be the end of. Are those cats or are they broke? Are they cat? This is trash. Oh, they broke. Okay. So they did go back that way.
There's a pipe that
We
runs
thought they
through
did. We didn't know if they stopped or where they went. So.
We pulled about 800 yards from my house. And it was all, when I came in, I thought, well, maybe I'll just use it and grow for the first year with his beds. And it was an actual. And I turned on his irrigation system. The water came out everywhere except the sprinkler head. I mean, it can. I fixed a couple pieces, and every time I fix a piece, I knew, and I fine up the hell with it, and I started doing this. Anyway, what was I saying? Oh, primocane. So you get a small crop your first year while it's establishing, and you get that in the fall. In the spring, your new growth will come up. It'll fruit heavy on the second year canes. You go in and cut them out after they're done fruiting, and then the first year canes will fruit again in the fall. So you get two harvests out of those. And apparently they root real easy for cutting. So if you get it,
when do you cut the first year cane cut?
when they're done fruiting. So after you'll get a well, your first year canes.
You get a fall and then a
Oh,
spring.
you never cut your first year cane. You cut your second year cane. Right. So you get fruit on that first year cane this year. That spring they'll fruit again in the spring. Then you cut them out. You can tell by the color. Those are prime gin and prime jam. Prime heart and one other one that I know of. Well, the primocane will fruit on the first year. So generally blackberries and raspberries work this way. It comes up the first year, no fruit. The second year, you turn it back a little bit. The second year, that wood's last year, will fruit the second year. And when it's done, it'll die. And you'll prune it out, and your next year's canes will come up, and the cane from this year will fruit next year. So you're always taking out the old cane and getting one harvest, very short harvest with blackberries usually in your spring. You can stagger them with different varieties on when they come in, but it's short, it's a couple weeks. With these, you get that that second year fruit will fruit real heavy for you early, but the first year canes will fruit a second time.
Do they fruit pretty heavy?
Yeah,
On the fall harvest?
but once they're established, this year you might get a few, right? But by next year, when that root crown's down there, and those all just came from Home Depot and Lowe's.
What is this on the outside?
Those are sunchokes or Jerusalem artichokes. They're a root crop. They'll get a bunch of little sunflower-looking heads on them, and when you pull them up, they're tubers. They kind of taste like a cross between potato and water chestnut. And one of those plants will produce 5-10 pounds of tubers.
They look just like a ginger root.
Yeah, they kind of do, except they're a lighter color.
Look at my gingers coming up.
They get real tall, don't they?
They get about, yeah, and you will see wild ones all over in a few months. When you're driving down the road, you see all those wild sunflowers.
Yeah.
They're actually a Jerusalem artichoke
really?
variety. But they're not very valuable for food. If you go dig them up, and I have, you get these little marble-sized ones, where these things are like a small potato.
Why is it? What's the difference?
They're just a wild
one.
variety that's never been worked with. You could probably dig a bunch of them up and start harvesting big tubers and bring them right in.
Probably, yeah.
Now
These
where
were,
can you get the right variety of these?
if you just put in Jerusalem artichoke tubers on Google, you'll find a bunch of people that sell them. You got to get them in spring.
What do they taste
So it's
like?
a cross between a potato and a water chestnut.
And
Yeah.
real
Do you-
creamy too. They have a real
you cook 'em
creamy,
like a
smooth texture.
You can.
Little garlic
you
and
can
butter,
cook them, you
and
can
they're
roast them.
awesome.
Some people make almost like a porridge. I don't like porridge, and I definitely don't like tubers made into porridge.
Yeah.
I like them raw,
Really?
sliced in like in a salad. Just don't eat too many of them raw.
Yeah, you said you add to the.
Nothing messy, just noisy and smelly.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, they'll give you gas, but they're actually really high in inulin, so they're very moderating for blood sugar. A great plant for diabetics. Another good plant that does the same stuff is groundnut. It's very hard I've tried it. It's very hard to grow groundnut down here. It's so hot. It's more of a, if you go up into like Massachusetts, Vermont, New Hampshire and find a stream, you'll find the whole side of it just lousy with groundnut. Once we get a couple little ponds in here and stuff like that, and some shady spots and some real loamy things built up, I'll try it again. But I wouldn't do, it's too exposed out here. Maybe in that bed eventually, once those little trees establish. Yeah, let's take a look at that real quick for those who haven't seen it. This is another way to do things. I didn't mulch this because I wanted to polyculture it, like really polyculture it. So in here is cucumber, in here is cowpea, in here is millet, there's an okra plant, and those that know where it is, don't tell the other people where it is, you try to find it.
Did you say okra?
Okra, there's one okra plant in here. It's between these two blueberries and it's on this side. Please don't step in the beds. What else is here? Millet, a little Picaeus oak.
This is a mint.
There's mint. There's a
Would that
couple
not be invasive on the bed?
and that's exactly what we want to do here. We want that mint. This is going to be.
It's not going to go too high.
This is a ground cover, right? This is a micro food forest.
Right.
This isn't a garden. This is, we've got a shrub layer, right? We've got a tree layer.
The ground cover.
We've got a reparative ground cover now, successing to a perennial ground cover of thyme and mint and sage.
Is that what that is?
That's sage, okay? So this is, you're talking about succession right there, right? This is man-made accelerated succession. We have a couple peppers in here, and even when this mint and the thyme and everything else is run in and covered this, if you want to put a couple peppers in here for an annual crop, you can come in and cut a hole and shove it right in there, and those roots will intermingle, and it'll go.
High five.
Yeah, exactly. Now you won't be able to come in here and plant 25 pepper plants through here, but you can throw one here, one there, one there, one there, and they'll do wonderfully, and they may produce double with something else. Well, I put these in because they're just interesting.
So what kind of trees?
These are dwarf apples, true dwarfs. They'll only get about 5 feet, and I'm actually going to flip things a little bit. They're actually going to be the subtree layer, even though they're the trees. These blueberries will do about like this. I'll stunt these about here and train them out. So the bush will become the
really farther.
You can keep cutting it back. Bonsai.
and the more you cut it back, the more gnarly and thick and contorted and cool looking. Now, over here, we've got to have nitrogen fixers. So we've got temporary nitrogen fixers in the cowpea. We've got a gumi. That's the Ukrainian plant. That's a perennial nitrogen fixer.
Where did you find that one?
Braintree Nursery. Okay. This is a wolfberry. It's also a nitrogen fixer. That'll grow into this could grow 6-8 feet if I let it. But we'll prune it. Okay. Here's a great way to understand it. Let me see if I can maybe I'll go look for. I don't know if it's been in the ground long enough yet.
Braintree's like a small bag.
So it ain't been in the ground long enough. Certain plants like this cowpea have a symbiotic relationship with certain bacteria in the soil. And unlike a lot of plants that need nitrogen to be there, a cowpea or a gumi have the ability to provide nitrogen out of the atmosphere. They need to work with bacteria to do that. And the bacteria will cluster on the roots and form little nodules of nitrogen and bacteria. And that bacteria will use a little bit of it, but the plant can have all it wants. And it can make as much as it wants. And the more bacteria and the more nitrogen fixtures, the more nodules you get. If this has only been in the ground like 7 days, if this had been in the ground, let's say 3 weeks, and I pulled it up and got all the roots with it, you'd see little white pinkish beads all over it. Now, when this plant dies, it's not there for the bacteria to work with anymore, so they kind of go dormant, and all that nitrogen falls off because of the soil. Or if we go through, once it's established, and we cut it and kill it, we accelerate that nitrogen. Or if we take a tree, like this gumi, which is more of a shrub, and let's say it gets up a great big canopy like this, and we prune it back to half of what it was, well, it'll self-prune its roots. It has to balance itself. Well, when it self-prunes its roots, it'll drop that nitrogen into the soil. So what we have is not just organic matter breaking down and fertilizing the soil. We have a natural symbiotic plant relationship where the plants are actually creating their own nitrogen and creating it in surplus, so when we pull the surplus nitrogen producers back, they then make that nitrogen available to the other plants. So we have a lot of nitrogen fixing going on in here right now. We also have daikon. There's a daikon. Now the reason I planted that is different than why you usually plant daikon to get penetration. Well, this is very loose soil. It has no trouble getting down there. But once it gets down to that hard pan, it does. So that daikon will send down, it'll look like a giant white carrot. It'll grow like that long. In this case, it'll probably grow about that long and then flatten out and kind of contort it and try to push itself into the ground. But it'll make pathways down into that carbon core. And when it goes away its first year and it rots out, those holes are left for all these other plants to find their way into. This is a little ecosystem right here. This is not a garden. This is not a garden bed. This is a functioning ecosystem in its infancy. This system is less than 2 weeks old right now. And it's just getting its legs under it, and it had a setback because it got the hell beat out of it. I actually had berries on it here. I bought them with berries. There's a few here, but a lot of them got knocked off. Now, you've got an acid-loving plant in a wolfberry. You got a blueberry, an alkaline plant for the wolfberry, and you got a blueberry that likes acid, and they're growing next to each other. So you look at that and go, how the hell does that work?
They go down and find the level of it.
Correct. They'll find the soil is never, if your soil pH is 7.2, it's not 7.2 everywhere.
It's where the end of that monitor went to.
So how do they tell you to do a soil sample? Get it from 5 or 6 locations, mix it all together, and send it in. Why? Because they're doing it for agricultural purposes where everybody tills. That will never be tilled. That allows the stratification of the pH levels. And once that's done, the plants will send their primary horizontal roots out in whatever layer works best for them.
That's where it's going to be the strongest.
And since we're polycultured and we have a good fungal base sharing nutrients, if this plant is going to decide I'm only going to go 5 inches down, but it needs a nutrient that's 10 inches down, it can get it by harvesting it from a bed mate.
That's why I don't mow my yard.
Yeah.
Purple flowers come up.
Yeah.
They die off, and then something else pops up, and then dandelions come up.
Yeah.
And then clover comes up.
Yeah.
It's all down there.
Yeah. If you guys would have been here 4 weeks ago, we had Indian paintbrush and blue bonnet everywhere. And we had grass this high, and we did not mow it until those flowers had run their course. And I hated to even mow it because the land's so fragile, but we were at a point where we kind of had to. You couldn't walk anywhere without having your legs filled up with grass seed and little pointed, sharp, nasty grass seed and sandburrs. All my wheelbarrows have solid wheels. We have so many sandburrs here that you have a wheelbarrow on the land for 15 minutes and flat tires. So we put solid, and then she got it flat with the tractor, like the day we got it. And I'm like, please tell me it didn't go through a tractor tire. What, she got it stuck in the ditch over there, and she's just trying to Rambo it out of the ditch, and she knocked it off the bead. So it was pretty easy to pull. But yeah, so I wouldn't walk around barefoot here. Yeah. I know some folks like to do that, but probably will not be happy.
Okay, like your blueberries, they come with the out of the pot. There's a root ball.
Yeah.
How long does it take a blueberry then to come out from that ball and actually?
Depends. If you take it out in the ball and stick it in there and dig it up a year later, it might still look pretty much like a ball with a few runners. What I do with a plant like that that's in a pot is I'll take it and stick it in a stock tank or something full of water and I'll let it sit there for a day. And I'll shake every bit of dirt off of that root ball, turn it into basically a bare root. And I'll pull those roots out in all directions. And I'll dig a big hole so I can lay the roots in and then fill that back so that it can get out of there. That's actually a great question because it's very important with trees. If you think about roots in a pot, once that root hits the edge of that pot, it only has one place it can go, around. So when you pull a tree out of a pot, you look at the roots, what do you see? Swirl. Okay, let's say one of your main leader lateral roots is in that swirl, and it's in a pot this big. Okay, and it stays like that way. And let's say 10 years from now, that tree's this big. Well, what's happened is that root's done wrap that tree and it's bit into it. And the tree can literally strangle itself, cut into the cambium and kill itself. It's called circling and girdling root syndrome. And a lot of times people get these trees in pots at Home Depot, they're 5, 6 years old, they just throw them in the ground, 10 years later they have this big beautiful tree and start getting sick.
My marigolds are like that.
And,
I pull them apart.
Pull them apart. I like to use water because you put less stress on your roots, you're not tearing roots that way. But if you get trees doing it, and it won't always happen, a lot of times that root will push out or something, but it's something that maybe you'll kill 20% of trees, especially if you look playing ornamentals in a front yard.